The Bradford Industrial Museum at Moorside Road in Eccleshill is a great place to visit in its own right, but it's also a goldmine for information and reference material which I can use in the Salt Revolution production. The mill was originally built by John Moore in 1875 for worsted spinning. Now, it did change ownership over the years, but in 1970 it was bought by Bradford Council from W&J Whitehead, who then opened it as a museum in December of 1974. As you know by now, I enjoy creating 3D CGI models of places of interest, and of course the Industrial Museum is a good candidate for this attention, so why don't we use the 3D model to familiarise ourselves with the site. On entering the site, you'll come across a building which used to be the cafeteria. Unfortunately, the cafe is closed, but the building is now used as an exhibition area. On the left is Gaythorne Row, a row of original Victorian back-to-back houses which were purchased back in 1987, then carefully dismantled and faithfully rebuilt here at the museum. We'll come back to those in a bit. The mill manager's house is one building which can be easily overlooked. Having said that, it's not always open. Now, I find that a little bit strange because this house I would class as a real jewel because it offers a great insight to middle class life during the Victorian and Edwardian periods. This building used to be the Horse Emporium, which stabled Darcy and Murdoch, the horses at work. Now, these two horses were full of character and a great attraction to visitors and children. But in 2012, despite public outcry and appeals, they were axed by Bradford Metropolitan Council. Today, this building houses a few stationary horse-drawn carriages and a collection of horse harnesses and brasses. The main entrance to the museum is directly opposite the former Horse Emporium. However, another place which can be easily overlooked is a blacksmith shop. The museum covers 4 basic areas of interest: textile and weaving, motive power, transport and printing. Upon entering the main building of the museum, we may catch a glimpse of the bust of a very familiar person. The purpose of my visit to the museum is of course to obtain some video reference material for the main Salt Revolution production. Now, over the decades I have been a regular visitor, so I already know what to expect. However, it is fair to say that during these tough financially restrictive times, for much of the time during opening hours, the museum's exhibits stand idle and silent, and a primary source of information is via the looped audio-visual presentations. But just look how the place seems to burst into life when the machines are switched on for those brief 30-minute durations. The museum is also home to some really fine examples of Jowett motor vehicles. Jowett, once based at Idle in Bradford, manufactured motorcycles, light cars and commercial vehicles from between 1906 to 1954. However, there is one exhibit here with which I share history during her working life. Nellie is a 040 saddle tank industrial steam locomotive. She was built in 1922 by Hudswell Clark of Leeds. Now, as a young lad back in the late 1960s, you'd more often than not find me playing down at the Leeds and Liverpool Canal between Apley Bridge and Shipley, and it's along that stretch of canal that you would have come across the Esholt sewage works. Well, actually, you'd have smelt it long before you came across it. Anyway, it's here where Nellie and her sister engine Elizabeth spent their entire working lives. And there's no points for guessing who often got to travel on Nellie's footplate during her latter working years. Now, I wouldn't dream of spoiling your visit to the museum by showing you all of its exhibits, so why don't we pop back outside and take a brief, tantalising look at the other attractions. Moorside House was first occupied by the mill's first owner, John Moore, and he lived there with his family until 1887. Today, when you walk through its front door, it really is like stepping back 130 years in time. It can be a little unnerving, because it really does feel as though the family still resides there. In fact, there have been some visitors who've been quite surprised by the woman who stands quietly in the children's nursery. Gaythorne Row was an actual row of 19th century back-to-back houses once known as Gaythorne Street in Great Orton, Bradford. In 1986, a little over 100 years after they were first built, they were purchased, carefully dismantled, then faithfully rebuilt on the site of the Industrial Museum. Recently, volunteers spent 6 years redecorating the houses to reflect periods of the 1870s, 1940s and the 1970s. What's more, members of the public donated many items connected with those periods. Another part of the museum which can be easily overlooked is the blacksmith's or farrier's workshop. Now, I think I'm right in saying that it has been a few years since this forge was struck. However, I do have memories of when it was used to shoe the horses at work. And it was whilst I was in here that I thought my mind was beginning to play tricks on me, because I began to hear the distinctive sound of hammer against steel on anvil. Well, after quickly affirming that I wasn't going potty and being a bit of a nosy so-and-so, I went in search of where the sound was coming from, and that's when I came across Ian Hogg, a retired blacksmith and volunteer at the museum. Ian doesn't do demonstrations. He's not what you would call front of house. He's just one of those people who freely gives of his time and skills to make our visit to the museum that much richer and informed. I spent about an hour watching Ian at work at the forge. We chatted, and I could see the love and passion he has for his craft and of the commitment he has made to the museum. Not everything is about money or the cynical "what's in it for me?" I know that the museum staff and volunteers have been set a punishing and relentless challenge. I also know they meet that challenge every single day on our behalf. Well, that almost concludes my research visit to the Bradford Industrial Museum. I hope you've enjoyed it. However, I would like to end on a note of poignancy. It's January. The year is 2014, and in a few months' time we shall be commemorating the 100th anniversary of the start of the Great War. The mill's clock tower, which can be seen for miles around, was built specifically as a memorial to those who fell during the Great War of 1914 to 1918.